Hello and welcome to another episode of Custode Central. I've been away doing some live stuff for a while, but we're back for the content releases for the September balance update. So I think most of you will have seen, you'll have had a chance to read through them and kind of come to your own thoughts about them. A couple of other content providers have, gone through the run-throughs. We're going to try and keep it very brief in terms of the actual summary because I think most people have actually seen this already before, but I have a few thoughts on kind of what the outcomes of this are likely to be, etc. So keeping it pretty high level, let's just blitz through the changes in case there are some of you that haven't read through these already. Number one is that dev wounds no longer are mortal wounds, so they don't spill. And what that means is that weapons that do devastating wounds that had very high damage counts now cannot functionally do horde clear anymore. You'll just super kill one model, and the additional damage is wasted. This doesn't really affect any other kind of army in the game other than Custodes, because Custodes had the 4+ roll against mortal wounds that we now don't get against dev wounds. Now we just lose models. It doesn't make that much of a change against Eldari because whereas before the mortal wounds would spill but would get a 4+ to save against it, so it was kind of a wash against Eldari, although they had the possibility to spike and we could roll bad. We could suddenly lose like 3 or 4 models, which is really bad. That's no longer a thing. I think it's a wash against Eldari. Against other, like damage 1, damage 2, damage 3 dev wound profiles that are in the game still, I think this is just a horrific nerf to Custodes. I think it's still good for the game though, but you just have to keep this in mind. I think where we will struggle moving forward is going to be armies that take dev wounds profiles. Now, what I've tended to see at a high level is I think most kind of units or armies that rely on dev wounds a lot, they've taken some nerfs. So it should be it shouldn't be as common. But the times that it does come up, it is going to be super punishing for us to face. Battle tactics restrictions on stratagems, right? So if you have like a shield captain, you now can only use free battle tactics stratagems instead of kind of epic deeds or anything like that. So this hurts us quite a bit. Lots of other armies were affected, but this one definitely hurts us a lot because now they've also changed Fight First to no longer be a battle tactic stratagem. So we will never be able to use Fight First for free with a shield captain. The only way we can really do that is with Trajan, but he has that as an ability, so that's why I think the value of Trajan goes up quite a bit. Overwatch. Now there's going to be no more like double overwatching. You need line of sight, so no more indirect overwatching, no more Titanic overwatching. For things to get insane value in a battle round. If something gets to shoot twice, for example, something like a Wraith Knight. I think we're going to see that significantly less. Custodes didn't really use the Overwatch phase. We just didn't have the guns for it. I mean, you could have done it if you bent over backwards with, Witch Seekers or Aquilon Custodes. I still don't think we're doing that now. So strictly, this nerf to Overwatch is very welcome to our army, and I think it's basically a buff to us because now we don't have to lose a bunch of models on our turn to opponents' Overwatch as often. I think stuff like Tower Overwatch is still going to be horrific with their cyclic ion cannons, and I think they're going to be spamming their battle suits quite a lot. And towering also got a nerf, so unless they're touching a ruin and then they can see normally, towering is basically gone now. So this is again a huge buff to Custodes because the aircrafts still kept their true line of sight, and we don't have any towering kind of models in our army. I mean, you could have taken Knight Allies, but I think the time to do that was at game release, not after the nerf to the towering kind of Imperial Knights. So this is mostly a buff to Custodes, to be honest. It's a wash on the battle tactics, and obviously the dev wound's really painful. But if you're not facing dev wounds, it's really not that bad. I know. Like the initial reaction when people saw the data slate was like they were just horrified. They were like, "Oh, it's over, it's over." I don't think it's quite over. So the Custodes changes Fight First, no longer a battle tactic, so you can't use it for free with a shield captain, fine. Guardian units now kept at 5 instead of 10. This is a big change. And it's a big change because now we can't pass the damage checks for something like a Cursed Cultist or Lich Guard. Now they took some point hikes, so I don't know how common they're going to be moving forward, but I suspect I suspect they'll be more common even with the point hikes because of the change of dev wounds and this change to guardian units, for example. There's much less in the game now that can kind of get through this damage check, right? Whereas before, you could just shoot a Wraith Guard, not a Wraith Guard, a Wraith Knight into it, and you spike a couple of dev wounds, and suddenly they're in a lot of problems. So, I mean, this is definitely going to be an issue. Also, on a more general note, we've lost massive stratagem efficiency, right? If you could bundle up, what would it be, like 500-600 points of your army, put AGA on it, put Fight Fast on it, and this is like the only unit that they can interact with, you were having a pretty good time. But now, capped at units of 5, if you're paying for leaders for all of them, leader costs went up as well. This is quite a big deal, and I think people are going to have to manage their command points much better than they used to. It was pretty tight before, so I think it's going to be even tighter now. And I think enhancement value has changed quite a lot as well. So Caesar's Hunter used to be like almost I wouldn't say mandatory auto-include, but I would say near auto-include on a 9-10 squad. Now, when you've only got 5 models that can benefit from this with the leader, the value of it goes down quite significantly. It's still, I'm not saying it's a bad enhancement, but it's nowhere near as good as it used to be because it scales nicely with the size of the squad. So Warden size is now 4 to 5. They now fit in a Land Raider. I actually think that's interesting. I think this would have been a nice option beforehand because sometimes you just didn't need 6 or you didn't want 6. But now they can fit in a Land Raider. Land Raider got a little bit cheaper. We're going to talk about that later on in the video. Bikes capping out at unit of 3. That's, to be honest, is a bit sad. Now, if the shield captain on bike didn't get like a weird points nerf as well, I think bikes were almost in an interesting spot because the thing that kept them back was towering and indirect, right? Because if anything ever got line of sight to shoot them, you were really, really sad. But if you were able to hide them, I think they would have been okay. Not good, but I think they would have been interesting to okay at 80 points a model. But because they're capped at units of 3 and because the shield captain is now something stupid like 180 points, yeah, bikes are still dead to me. So let's have a quick run through the point changes that don't matter. Aquilon, yeah, they came down. Alaris went up. They're now the same point cost as Alaris, but Aquilon rules aren't as good. You get reroll 1s versus closest instead of just reroll versus all character led or monster vehicle. And the Golden Light wording is different. They specifically go into strategic reserves. They can't really Golden Light turn 1. So it's just a no. The bikes, yeah, they went from 90 to 80, but again, it's been offset now by basically the shield captain on bike going up for reasons God knows why. The Agamatus, same thing. They came down a lot in points, but it still just doesn't matter because you need the bike captain to use the unit properly, and they've just erased all of the benefits of the dropping points. Vigilators went from 15 to 13-ish, give or take on the squad size. It's welcome. I still don't think it's good enough to run because, again, it just doesn't fulfill the multi-function purpose. Like, there are some matchups where it's really, really good. There's a bunch of others where it will just die and do nothing. So I think it's no good. Aculus going up from 155 to 175 is just like a joke. Nobody was taking it really anyway. Nobody will take it now. Adrosite. This is pretty almost interesting, but not enough, right? So they went from 65 to 60 a model. Doesn't seem that big, but you have to always consider opportunity cost, right? And the opportunity cost used to be 65 to 45. Now we're looking at 60 versus 50. So it's a 20-point differential to a 10-point differential, but it's still not good enough because I still don't think they're kind of as good or as flexible as normal Guardian units because they can double shoot. And these guys get lethal hits. Who cares when you've got a strength 9 gun, really? And ignore cover. Again, who cares when you're AP4? That's how I feel about that. Sagittarium. This is interesting now because they used to be 5 points more than Guardians, but now they're 5 points less than the Guardians. I think if you could take them in units of 3, they would have some play. I think having to take them in units of 5 is what holds them back. AP1 is not something I love, so even though it's 45 points instead of 50, it's still not something I'm super interested in. So let's have a quick look through the point changes that matter. Guardians went up by 5 points, Wardens went up by 5 points, Alaris went up by 5 points. So you see it's just it's a flat point increase across the board, and it's because, you know, they're trying to keep everything in multiples of 5. It's pretty annoying. But what does this mean? It means basically that Alaris got nerfed less than Guardians as a percentage. That's just the way that math works. Now, Venatori, this is massive. They dropped from like 78.3 points to 66.7. And what you'll notice now is that Venatori are actually cheaper than Alaris used to be. Because you always have to compare the opportunity cost, not just like absolute point values. So this is big, and I think you should be taking Venatori. When I say Venatori, always assume that I'm talking about Lance Venatori. I think the pistol buckler ones are rubbish. So don't take these. Witch Seekers, they're now 12.5 points-ish, give or take, on the squad size. What this means is that you can take 4 for 50 points. They used to be 60 points. Doesn't sound like a lot, but this is... I think this is pretty big. Having the scout move and being able to force battle shock tests for 10 points extra, and you can still put them into strategic reserve if you want to do some mission play, I think it's pretty big. So assuming you have the points, I think this is a very, very decent point sync for you instead of prosecutors. While we're here, we'll just mention obviously the exaction squads. They're just a no-no. You've got to take them in units of 10, and they got points nerfed. So, you know, unfortunately, if you bought those models, you're pretty sad, and I think you're going to struggle to shift them onto somebody else until maybe like 11th edition or something like that. Trajan's gone up by 15 points. I think this is okay. So keep in mind, because Trajan has an ability to fight first, this is pretty valuable, because we basically need to make up the CP that we're now losing on not being able to fight first with a shield captain for free, right? So you're now going to have to try and float 2 CP like in every turn of the game, so that you have access to fight first if you need it. Trajan's going to help you a lot here. Also, in addition, because of the unit cap to 5, having a unit that can swing 12 times, and if you have the CP, you can still fight first. This is actually still pretty big, because this now makes you still kind of unchargeable, right? Whereas before, when you had a unit of 9 or 10 Guardians, like, there was kind of nothing in the game that could charge that and live, or it'd be worthwhile for them to charge and take the hits, right? That's not really true anymore with units of 5 Wardens or 5 Guardians, right? Like, there are stuff that is big enough and hard enough to charge it, take the hits, be sad, and still whack you back for it to be a positive trade on them. So having Trajan in there with the 12 attacks is pretty big. Shield Captain goes up by 20 points. Obviously, Shield Captain got nerfed, and we take the 20-point set. It's sad. You still want a Shield Captain in your list. It just kind of doesn't matter. You just need to be able to pop AGA for free as many times as you can, basically. The Blade Champion going up from 100 to 120. It's a bigger percentage increase than 120 to 140. You know, math again. But I think with the introduction of Venatori, Blade Champions become much less interesting to me than they used to be. And we'll talk about that later on in the video as well. Land Raiders randomly went down from 260 to 240. This is very welcome, especially because now 5 Wardens can fit inside of a Land Raider. So, in my opinion, I think Alaris are still fine. I think Venator are really good. I think you should be running some. I preferred Wardens to Guardians before the balance update anyway. I was just kind of forced to take a unit of 10 Guardians to pass the stat checks from Necrons. Now, I think Wardens are... I think I just prefer Wardens, right? And the reason is, when you lose games, it's not because your melee output wasn't enough. It's usually because you just got shot off the board by something. If you don't want to get shot off the board, having Wardens is way better than having Guardians. Additionally, you know, the Wardens can pop their Feel No Pain. And again, this helps you manage your CP balance so that you can always float this 2 CP to have access to fight first if and when you need it. So let's do a bit of analysis. So exaction squads aren't real anymore. You just take prosecutors or Witch Seekers if you have the points. I really think 10 points for scout move and covering your horde clear if you're no longer taking Alaris, like me, is nice, and forcing battle shocks. For 10 points, I think it's very good. It's not something I'd start my list with, but if you come up towards the end of your list and you think, oh, I have some points left, upgrading to Witch Seekers I think is very, very valid. The thing that used to not be so good about Witch Seekers is, there used to be towering stuff that could get line of sight to you. There used to be indirect stuff that used to kill you because you weren't an Imperial Assassin. I think it's just way less likely now. So Witch Seekers got even better. Custodes is now 90 points, but they can only target battle stratagems. Fine. It's a bit of a nerf to the Vect, but I think it's probably a bit of a minor buff because now your unit's 90 points instead of 115. Probably have to do another video looking at the Custodes value again to see what is and is not a battle stratagem. But I suspect there's still good targets to Vect that are battle stratagems. So I think this is actually a bit of a buff. CP management super important. So yeah, I think Trajan is just an auto include. I really wish they would have, with the balance update, done the FAQ on what he affects, what he doesn't affect with the -1 damage, etc. Even if he doesn't, I still like him for fight first as an ability or swing it 12 times. So yeah, I think Blade Champion values have gone down marginally because his Victus Dev profile. This used to get you the mortal wounds on 6s, you'd re-roll them, blah blah blah, and this would give you some horde clear as well. Even though we have volume of attacks anyway with our units, and this was pretty nice. But now we just super kill something instead. It makes really no difference to us whether they don't get a save or not. We just lose that spilled damage now. But also Venatari are now very competitive, so I think the mobility can be replicated elsewhere, right? So before, the comparison used to be something like 5 Guardians and a Blade Champion would have been, before, was 325 points, and 6 Venatari was 470, right? It's a bit of a no-brainer. Whereas now, you're looking at 370 versus 400. It's much closer. Now, the other thing with Venatari is that they can Rapid Ingress for free, and they get Lance for free. Now, you're not getting the rerolls, but you're saving a lot of CP, right? So now it's not so slam dunk, in my opinion, that you need a Blade Champion, whereas before you wanted at least a Blade Champion to give you that threat range. You can replicate this threat range now with Venatari. It's not quite as good in terms of threat range, even though you move 10, because you don't have advanced charge, you don't have to reroll on charges. But it is slightly more reliable in terms of, if you want to go somewhere, you can't really have some bad luck and really fail a charge that's like, I don't know, 12 inches away. It's impossible. It's impossible. So, how has our playstyle changed, in my opinion, right? So we gained some ability with cheaper Venatari, and opportunity cost is a relevant factor rather than absolute point cost, right? So it's not that they just dropped like 10ish points, it's that they dropped 10ish points and the other infantry went up 5 points, right? This makes Venatari Lancers really good, in my opinion. I think they're probably one of the best infantry that we have now in the game. Maybe Wardens are up there still, but I think they are just way better than Alaris for the points, and I think they're better than Guardians. Could be wrong, but this is just my feeling. You can't use these unchargeable bricks of 9 to 10 to completely invalidate large melee units, right? So because we're capped at 5, we can still get charged now. Even if we fight first, it's not guaranteed that we just win this combat, right? So it's a different kind of playstyle. You can't just sit there and say, "Come at me, bro," because sometimes they'll come at you and you're not going to like it. So what's the other kind of further on knock-on effect of this? Is because you don't have these huge units, you have to spend these points somewhere else. Having smaller units spread out on the board just gives your opponent more units for them to charge, which again puts more CP pressure on you in terms of what needs to fight first, etc. So anyway, I still think we mainly lose to superior firepower on the other side of the board, right? And we are now really, really, really scared of devastating wounds. But I think generally, the units with dev wounds, they've kind of taken points nerfs as far as I can see, or they've taken kind of rule changes with, like Deathwatch, for example, right? So I don't think, obviously to us, it feels like, we feel super attacked right now, right? But I don't think the meta is going to shift towards pumping more, pumping their army construction towards dev wounds as much, especially because dev wounds now don't spill, because they're not mortal wound anymore. So it feels really bad it is going to be really bad the times that you face it, but I don't think people are going to shift their army construction towards dev wounds unless they're specifically targeting Custodes, and I don't think they will because I don't think we're quite top tier anymore. I think if we didn't take this dev wound change, we would have been. I think we would have been really happy actually with the changes. Also, I think running at our opponents now with big bricks, relying on stratagem support, with AGA, etc. I think that's now finished, right? With the kind of point nerfs to infantry, with the point nerfs to the leaders, and the changes to fight first on the stratagem efficiency, I think if you try and run your old lists, you're going to be like 200 points short, and you're just not going to have enough stuff. That's what I think. And your stratagems aren't going to be as efficient, and I think you're just going to get... I think you're going to have a bad time if you kind of try and run the same list as you did pre-patch, in my opinion. So how do we actually win the game now if we can't do that? And I think you have to deal damage in other ways. So that means you have to go back to shooting, or you have to initiate some charges, right? So obviously, it's better to initiate, it's better to charge than be charged, unless they have fight first. So you have to think about doing damage. You can't just like creep across the board anymore and be in this bubble of, you can't charge me, etc. So how has the rest of the game changed, right? And I think it's all better in my opinion. This is actually way better balanced patch than I was expecting from Games Workshop. So well done them. From what I've seen, all the indirect platforms really have gone up in points, right? That's really good because indirect, in my opinion, was really bad for the game. It's really good for your army if you had access to it and you could spam it, but it was really bad for the game, super uninteractive. So we're happy that that's going away because that was problematic for us to deal with, because the armies that could tend to do that could typically screen and then you just have to walk across like, 2 turns of death, and it was really boring. Right? You either make your 4-ups or you don't. Eldari, I think, as much as people are crying about the Custodes nerfs, I think Eldari took way, way bigger nerfs than Custodes, right? And I think we're going to see less of them. I don't know how much less, but I think we're definitely going to see less. And I expect our matchup to be in the region of 40 to 50% instead of, what was it, like 25 to 30% in a matchup where people are both pretty good, right? And the reason for this is that the change to Overwatch, they can't do it on towering and they can't do it indirectly. It's very big, right? And the nerf to towering means that Wraith Knight can't see stuff that they used to be able to see, and they took points nerfs, and they don't get mortal wound spilling, right? So the 2 units that they used to rely on were the Wraith Knight and the D cannons, and that used to be able to Overwatch brutally, right? It could go into tough targets, it could go into hordes, it could do everything. Can't really do that anymore. Now they have to take Night Spinners if they want to do horde clear and indirect, right? That took points nerfs as well. So I think the Eldari armies are much smaller. That's not to say I think they're a bad army now. I think they're still good. They can still cleanly disassemble some armies, but I think they will now start to struggle against others because they don't have that critical mass of they just kill everything that they see and nothing can get close to them. Right? I think that's over now versus the other top tier armies. GSE I think also took big nerfs on points. And their changes to how they recycle units have massively changed. I think one of the big ones is that I'm not sure we're going to see aberrants anymore. The existence of aberrants makes you force to kind of deploy backwards unless you just take the view that you think you have to go fast to have a good game into GSC. That was my opinion. Some people disagree. So I think you're not going to see aberrants anymore. Their armies are also going to be a lot smaller with the points changes. And they've also replicated what I think was a WTC ruling on the Nexus stratagem, right? If you want to use a stratagem that affects your unit and another unit, that other unit also has to have that character that gives you the ability. So it's going to put more CP pressure on them. So I think this is very significant. So in my opinion, the changes to the unit recycling, I think in some instances it's not going to matter. They still just crush their opponent. But I think in others, this will matter and they'll run out of steam. In the later turns where typically they are just stomping because they've all their units always come back. But now you can, if they roll some units badly, they might run out of gas and you can hold on to your lead at the start of the game. So I suspect they're going to stop crushing events and having like amazing XM0, XM1 stats. I think it used to be like 25% or something like that. Of all GSE players used to go like undefeated or only have 1 loss. I think those days are probably gone. And I think we're just going to see less of GSE. I don't know. I think GSE players tend to be a bit of a special breed. You know, you need that level of commitment to own that many models to paint them all up. I think this is an incredibly hard army to paint. So maybe they'll still, you know, try and tech it out, etc. But I think we're going to see less of them. So these are the two matchups that were really problematic for Custodes before the balanced update. If those two armies didn't exist, I think Custodes would have been winning lots of events. So in terms of our worst matchups, I think both of them went up significantly. I don't think we're winning in them still, but I'd expect, you know, GSE to be in the 40 to 50% region as well in terms of matchup. Imperial Knights, they just took massive nerfs, right? They lost their towering unless they're turning into the terrain. The big knights lost their bondsman abilities. This is big. I think we're going to see a lot less Imperial Knights than we used to. And in addition, I think we're going to see so few of them that people's lists aren't going to be building to deal with knights anymore, because they don't have to. They could still build a lot of anti-tank shooting, because I think a lot of armies got significant point reduction, so people just have more stuff. And of that stuff, some of it's going to be tanks, like Astra Militarum, for example, going to have tons of tanks now, I think, because their indirect got nerfed, but their direct shooting tanks got a lot cheaper. But yeah, I think people aren't going to be building for knights anymore, because I don't think knights are that good. So what else has changed? Many armies just got a lot of cheaper stuff. You know, Sisters, Votan, Death Guard, you know, Admech, right? So I think you're just going to see a lot more stuff on the other side of the table, and this is good. It's unclear whether that's going to be enough to push some of those low tier armies, you know, even to the mid table or higher. But for sure, you're going to see a lot more stuff. Now, some of them still can't be top tier in my opinion. Something like Sisters of Battle or Grey Knights, and that's because they still don't have the rules or the units or the data cards to crack armor with shooting. They just don't have it, right? The melter guns just aren't good enough. The side cannons aren't. They're just not good enough from GK. They have to make some charges. So some of them are still hamstrung by kind of army rules. Chaos Space Marines, I think, is a bit of a wash, right? Their good stuff got nerfed, but some other stuff got cheaper. I don't know how it's all going to pan out, or what their new lists are going to look like. But I will tell you that if you face Forge Fiends on the other side, before they didn't do Dev Wounds because it was they wouldn't kill you cleanly. But now if they do Dev Wounds, I think their Forge Fiends went up by like 10, 15 points, something like that. You know, now they will just activate it. You know, they'll take the hazard test and they'll just shoot you, and it's going to be bad because you're not going to save on the fours. You're just going to lose models if you don't have AGA. So I think this is like one of these cases where, you know, if they have 3 Forge Fiends and you're facing CSM, you're likely going to have a bad day. Thousand Suns also is going to be absolutely horrific for you to face as Custodians, because they've got Dev Wounds and you're going to take a lot of them. The only kind of saving grace is that in general I think Thousand Suns were nerfed quite a lot on points. So I think you're going to see less of them, but the times that you do see them, it's going to be a really, really rough matchup in my opinion. I think Necron Bricks are also going to be problematic because we can't pass their stat checks anymore. Yes, you can do things where you like tag team them, or triple team them, and with your smaller units. But it's still not. It still doesn't feel great. The kind of good thing is that the Doomsday Arcs are much more expensive now. They used to be able to pick up kind of squads, so maybe it's a wash. But I still feel like, you know, Necrons, they're going to go into a brick somewhere somehow, and you're just not going to be able to deal with them properly. They're going to hold the point for way longer than you want, and maybe you'll never own that point. So this is kind of where I've landed on what would I suggest running. So I think it's still very early to say definitively. We are very far into theory land here. Before, generally on the channel, I like to stay within, you know, my game experiences and testing data. We are very far in theory land here. So the list that I think I would want to run is something like Trajan and a shield captain on foot, not an Alaris one, just a regular shield captain. 5 wardens and a land raider, 5 wardens and a land raider, and 6 Venatari. 6 Venatari, I'm unsure if I'd want 2 squads of 3 or 1 squad of 6. I think I prefer 1 squad of 6. We want a Calidus and an Eversaw and 2 times 4 Witch Seekers. And I think this leaves me with either 5 or 15 points left. So we'll talk through why do I think this is kind of an interesting composition for Custodes to try currently, right? And that is shooting. There's going to be a lot of it from the other side now in terms of the game. You know, people's armies got bigger. The only armies that didn't get bigger are the ones that got nerfed, right? So I think it's safer to be in a Land Raider than not in a Land Raider, right? And that's because there is a lot of profiles. There's going to be a lot more guns on the other side of the board. And unless those guns are specifically good at killing T12 tanks, they're really inefficient shooting you, right? So you'd much rather take these shots on your Land Raider than your infantry dudes. However, I do think the Land Raiders probably would be the first things that I drop if I change my list, right? And probably it'd be to change them either for a Caladius or my Venatari, right? And the reason is, again, we can't walk big bricks of dudes up the board anymore and do okay. So we're going to have to do our damage elsewhere because we're not going to be able to fight first all the time. We're going to run out of CP, we're going to have some problems, and there's just going to be way more guns on the other side of the board. So we're going to have to do it by shooting or initiating charges ourselves. So you could go with Blade Champions or you could go with Venatari. I actually think going gunless now is kind of sketchy with the amount of stuff on the other side of the board, right? Like there's a lot of, like Tau, for example, are going to be freaking scary, right? If you don't have guns and you're not mechanized and you're just trying to walk across the board, like you're going to eat it, I think, against Tau. They're just going to put so many cyclics in your face that you're just going to fail a bunch of saves. Towering and indirects are going to be seen much less because of the nerf to the towering rules. Wraith Knights, they've got pointed up the wazoo. Indirect, they got pointed up the wazoo. So I think, yeah, Witch Seekers are now way safer than they used to be. And this is kind of going to alleviate the problems that you had with starting your Land Raiders null deployed, right? Because you now have to drive around the terrain. You now maybe can't reach the objective turn 1. You could always disembark, use your 3 inches and see how you do. But I think this is a nice little, you have your Witch Seekers, you do the scout moves, and you can give yourself an extra turn for your Land Raiders to get to where they need to go. This also allows you to kind of move less aggressively and do it more safely. And this kind of gives you an opportunity to activation lock your opponent, where they might be able to just kill your Land Raider, but then they don't have enough stuff that has line of sight to your disembarked units. So, the Land Raider is not only there just for the gun platform, it's to provide you an armored shell for your infantry dudes. What else is good? Starting stuff off the board. So Venatari is good, right? That can get value immediately the turn that they come in. Or, if you could do this with shooting, but stuff like Caladius is a good shooting platform, but it's very hard to get 100% point conversion on the turn that they arrive, even if they're deep strike. Generally anything above 50% is considered quite a good unit. That's kind of where the Caladius is. It's not amazing, so I think I prefer to take the Land Raider here. But Venatari, you can rapid ingress for free. You could multiple rapid ingress units for free. Basically gets you a free charge, and they're really good at flipping objectives, and they can go into anything because they have the Lance rule. And if they need to go into something where the Lance rule would have been needed, it doesn't cost you additional CP. So again, this is taking CP pressure off of your army list, right? You don't have to pay for the rapid ingress. You don't have to pay for the +1s, you just get it all naturally. So I think Trajan and Wardens in particular alleviate this a lot, because now you can feel no pain instead of popping AGA, and you can use Trajan's ability instead of fight fast. So having these on hand allows you to manage your CP much better. I think if you try and run your old kind of list, I think the moment you run out of CP, I think your army is just going to start crumbling horrifically. So I think people need to change kind of how they construct the list and how they're intending for the army to play. So what else do I like about this? It presents very little value to shooting armies on early turns. And remember, from my perspective, shooting armies are kind of the major threat to Custodes. I'll have to see what World Eaters look like, how horrific they are, but even against World Eaters, having guns is really good. Shooting them is really good. So we present them basically lone agent assassins, our Calidus, our Eversaw. If they're outside of 12, good luck to them. They can't shoot us. Witch Seekers, we can scout somewhere extremely safely. right? So we don't give them line of sight. And if they don't have line of sight, you know, it's unlikely they have indirect. It's unlikely that they have range. Obviously, they could, but the chance of that happening goes way down, I think. In addition, the Witch Seekers give us a bit of horde clear, which we're missing because we don't have any Alaris. And then we've got Wardens, again, hard to kill with shooting. In Land Raiders, again, hard to kill and shooting. There are going to be some army archetypes like, let's say, Drukhari, Dark Lance spam. I don't know if that has got nerfed or that build has got nerfed really, but I don't think it's necessarily that easy to pop Land Raiders. I think there will be definitely a couple of army archetypes in the game where we will play hard into it, and we will be sad about that. But I think we're going to have to do something different than what we used to. And I think a lot of armies that will be popular with point drops will still struggle with Land Raiders. So stuff like Sisters of Battle, Grey Knights, like they just can't really kill it in shooting, right? So I think it can't be that bad. So let me know in the comments below what you guys are running, how you're finding your games, you know, what you like and what you're not liking. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and join the channel if you want to help out. I've got a link to my Patreon below, and we will see you guys next time.